The courtroom was silent, so silent that I could hear my own heartbeat echoing in my chest. Months of pain, betrayal, and humiliation had led to this moment. I was ready to finally let go, to close the chapter on a marriage that had already died long before this day. But then she walked in. My wife, no, my ex-wife-to-be, glowing, smiling, and unmistakably pregnant. The air shifted instantly. Whispers rippled across the room. I froze, every muscle in my body locking as if time itself refused to move. And in that instant, I realized, this wasn't over. Not even close. It's strange how silence can feel heavier than sound. That morning, before the hearing, I'd sat in my car outside the courthouse for nearly 20 minutes, staring at the cracked dashboard, replaying everything that had led to this moment. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the way I used to be. I was numb. Divorce, they say, is the death of a shared dream. But what they don't tell you is how quiet that death is. No screams, no explosions. Just the slow suffocation of trust, one broken promise at a time. I met Emily when we were both young, too young to understand the weight of forever. She had this kind of reckless laughter that made you forget how cruel the world could be. I was drawn to her brightness, maybe because I'd always lived in shadows. I came from a working-class family, a father who broke his back in the factory and a mother who taught me that love meant sacrifice. Emily came from comfort, a family that never had to worry about bills or broken shoes. I thought our differences balanced us. In truth, they built a fault line we pretended not to see. We'd been married 8 years when I first noticed the distance. It wasn't sudden, it was like fog creeping in. A forgotten goodnight kiss. A phone turned face down at dinner. A smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. At first, I blamed myself. I worked long hours as a civil engineer, trying to build a stable life for us. Maybe I was too focused on security, not enough on affection. But then came the late-night calls, the sudden business trips. The new perfume she claimed was just a gift from a friend. Still, I wanted to believe her. Because belief was easier than heartbreak. The moment I found out the truth, it wasn't cinematic. No grand reveal, no confrontation with shouting and tears. Just an email. A mistake, one she sent to me instead of him. His name was Darren. I'd met him once at a charity event she helped organize. He was charming in that overconfident way, sharp suit, sharper smile. I remember shaking his hand and feeling a flicker of unease. Something about him felt rehearsed, like a man too used to winning. The email was short. Intimate. The kind of message that leaves no room for denial. I remember staring at the screen until the words blurred, until the world itself felt unreal. When I confronted her, she didn't cry. She didn't even deny it. She just said, "I'm sorry you had to find out this way." That sentence haunted me more than the betrayal itself. It wasn't the apology of regret, it was the apology of convenience. The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork, lawyers, and awkward silence. My family sided with me, hers avoided me. The truth had a way of making everyone uncomfortable. I tried to keep my dignity intact, to act as if I was okay. But every time I passed by her favorite mug, or saw her handwriting on old grocery lists, it hit me all over again. She hadn't just betrayed me, she'd erased the life we built, like it never mattered. Still, I told myself that the hearing would bring closure. That maybe, standing in that courtroom, we could end things cleanly. I had prepared myself for anger, for bitterness, for tears. But not for this. When she walked into the courtroom that day, my breath caught. Her hand rested gently on her stomach, a subtle gesture, but impossible to miss. Her face glowed with that unmistakable softness of early motherhood. And that smile, that infuriating, knowing smile, it wasn't guilt or shame. It was victory. The judge hadn't even started speaking yet, but I already knew what she wanted me to see. The timing was deliberate. This was her statement, her silent declaration of triumph. She wanted me to know that she had moved on, that she had a new life growing inside her, a life that would forever tie her to someone else. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was mockery. I could feel eyes on me, friends, family, strangers. The hum of whispered pity filled the air like static. Everyone knew, or thought they did. They saw a man abandoned and replaced, a fool whose love had become another woman's stepping stone. But they didn't know the full story. They didn't know the quiet cruelty that came before this moment, or the truth buried beneath her smile. Because what no one else realized, not even her, was that I had discovered something she never intended me to find. Something that would change the way this story ended. The courtroom's air felt heavier with each passing second, as if it were conspiring against me. Emily's presence radiated a kind of serene confidence, the kind that comes from knowing the world is exactly how you want it to be. She sat there, hands resting lightly on her stomach, swaying slightly as if even her body were in on the performance. I could see it in her eyes, the smug satisfaction, the message she didn't need to voice. She had won. Or at least, that's what everyone in that room believed. As the judge droned on, I felt a strange detachment. My mind was elsewhere, replaying every detail that led to this day. I remembered the subtle hints I'd ignored, the way she changed conversations when I entered the room, the secretive phone calls, the sudden interest in places I'd never been. She had built a careful world around me, one in which I could never see the cracks until it was too late. And now, that world had collapsed spectacularly, right in front of everyone. But betrayal, I learned, doesn't only come in obvious forms. It seeps slowly into life, contaminating everything it touches. Even my closest friends had noticed something off but said nothing. They didn't want to choose sides. Or maybe they thought I deserved it. It's astonishing how many people cheer for the victor without knowing the full story. Then, there was the lawyer's voice, sharp and deliberate, slicing through my spiral of memories. Divorce proceedings were supposed to be straightforward, a legal disentangling of shared lives, but it was anything but. Paperwork, evidence, testimonies, claims of assets, accounts, and promises made under duress. My stomach churned with the absurdity of it all. Money, property, and possessions were debated like they held the weight of morality. Yet here we were, reduced to numbers and clauses, while she paraded the most intimate part of her life before me like a trophy. It was during the cross-examination that I saw the first real crack in her armor. A detail she had tried to hide, a financial irregularity, an act of betrayal that cut deeper than her affair. Her face didn't falter, but I noticed the subtle twitch of her fingers. I realized then that the story wasn't as clean as she made it seem. I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in weeks: hope. Hope was dangerous. I began to connect the dots, tracing the chain of her deceit back months, even years. Every lie she had told, every excuse, every misdirection, it had left a trail. And every trail led somewhere. It led to a truth she had assumed I would never uncover. A truth that, if revealed, could shift the balance of power entirely. But the emotional toll was exhausting. Sitting there, heart pounding, watching the person I once loved manipulate perception, I felt rage bubbling just beneath the surface. Rage that wasn't only about the affair or the pregnancy. Rage at the audacity, the deliberate timing, the cruelty of the psychological game she was playing. I had to maintain composure, smile politely, nod when required, while inside a storm raged unchecked. Outside the courtroom, whispers had already begun. People assumed sympathy would naturally flow my way, that her pregnancy might soften the blow of her betrayal. They couldn't understand that, sometimes, the most intimate victories are the cruelest. And as much as I wanted to show restraint, the fire in me wouldn't be ignored. The rising tension wasn't just personal, it was systemic. Even the judge seemed subtly biased, offering her leniency in small gestures, a nod here, a pause there. The world, it seemed, was predisposed to favor certain narratives, certain faces. Injustice often wore a calm expression. It wasn't loud, but it was there. I could feel it pressing down on me, reminding me that the battle wouldn't just be emotional, it would be strategic. I remembered my father's words from long ago. Sometimes, the fight isn't about winning what's yours. It's about standing for what's right. And in that moment I understood. This wasn't about revenge or pride. It was about uncovering the truth, about standing firm even when the world assumed you were already defeated. Her smile, once a source of fury, became a symbol of everything I needed to confront. The court had become a stage, and she had assumed the role of victor. But no victory is absolute. Every carefully crafted image, every deceitful gesture, carried the weight of consequences yet to come. And as the hours stretched on, I felt the tide beginning to shift, not outwardly, not visibly, but in the subtle ways that mattered most. Every whispered rumor, every judgmental glance, every sigh of pity or assumption of weakness, it fed me. It reminded me of the undercurrent of truth she had tried to bury. And when the right moment arrived, when the threads of her deception began to unravel, I would be ready. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath as the final pieces of the puzzle came together. Hours of observation, subtle questioning, and quiet notes I had taken now converged into one undeniable truth. Emily had underestimated me, assuming my shock and heartbreak would leave me passive. She had no idea how carefully I had watched, how meticulously I had collected the fragments she left behind. And now, the moment of reckoning had arrived. As the lawyer laid out the evidence, her financial manipulations, the hidden transactions, the inconsistencies in her story, I felt a wave of vindication. The courtroom, which had been filled with murmurs of pity and disbelief, fell silent again. All eyes were on her, and for the first time that day, her composure faltered. The carefully crafted image of victory she had worn so effortlessly began to crack. I remembered the morning I first discovered the truth. At the time, it had felt like my world had been ripped apart. Every moment since then had been a fight to maintain my dignity, to navigate a system that seemed inherently biased against anyone who dared to be wronged. But now, the scales were tipping. Evidence that had once seemed insignificant, emails, receipts, small discrepancies in accounts, now painted a portrait of intentional deception. And she could no longer control the narrative. Her smile wavered, a flicker of fear crossing her otherwise serene face. That smile, which had haunted my thoughts for months, now felt fragile and human. The court had been her stage, and she had believed she could dictate every scene. But the spotlight had shifted, and the audience could see through the illusion. I could feel my own emotions surge, a combination of relief, triumph, and lingering sorrow. This wasn't just about winning a divorce. It was about reclaiming the dignity she had tried to strip away, about proving that betrayal, no matter how cleverly concealed, leaves traces that can be uncovered. And as the judge examined the documents, read the testimonies, and considered the evidence, I felt a strange calm descend. The storm inside me had found its direction. Emily's hands tightened around her growing belly, a silent plea for sympathy that no longer had power. I watched her, not with malice, but with clarity. I understood her motives, her recklessness, and her desire for dominance in a situation she had always thought she controlled. Yet in that moment, control had shifted. The courtroom's energy, once heavy with anticipation and doubt, now pulsed with justice, small, imperfect, but undeniable. And then came the moment I had feared and anticipated in equal measure, the judge's ruling. It was measured, deliberate, and uncompromising. Every misdeed, every act of deception, every manipulation was acknowledged. The court did not ignore her pregnancy, nor did it excuse her betrayals, but it weighed the facts with impartiality. I could see the shock ripple across her face, the first authentic emotion she had displayed all day. Fear. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was subtle, a quiet realization that her calculated path had met its match. Her carefully constructed image of victory dissolved under scrutiny. She had assumed that timing, charm, and a glow of pregnancy would blind the world to her actions. She had been wrong. As the gavel struck, signaling the legal conclusion, the tension in the room broke like a dam. Whispers and exclamations filled the air. I felt the weight lift from my chest, the suffocating anxiety of months replaced by a profound sense of clarity. The fight had not been about humiliation or revenge, it had been about truth. And truth, when pursued relentlessly, has a way of prevailing. But even in victory, there was an ache. The emotional toll of betrayal is never fully erased. Memories linger, scars remain, and the knowledge that someone once so close could wield such cruelty is a quiet burden that does not disappear. Yet in that burden, I also discovered resilience, a recognition that I could survive, and even thrive, beyond the shadow of her actions. Outside the courtroom, life had not paused. People whispered, speculated, and judged, but their opinions no longer dictated my emotions. I had reclaimed my narrative, and in doing so, I found a sense of freedom I had not known since before the marriage. The climax of the conflict was not just legal, it was deeply personal. It was the moment where betrayal met consequence, where calculated smiles were met with impartial reality, and where courage, quiet, persistent, unwavering, triumphs over deception. The last thing I remember before stepping out into the cold afternoon air was her glance, fleeting, almost apologetic, but quickly masked. I didn't respond. There was no satisfaction in confrontation anymore, only the quiet assertion of self, the understanding that the story had shifted, and that her power over me had ended. And with that, the climax passed, leaving behind the residue of lessons learned, truths revealed, and the bittersweet taste of justice tempered by human imperfection. The courthouse doors closed behind me, muffling the distant hum of the city. Outside, the air was crisp, carrying a strange sense of liberation. Months of heartbreak, deception, and silent suffering had culminated in a verdict that was not just legal, it was profoundly personal. I had expected closure to feel like fireworks, like some dramatic catharsis that would erase the pain. Instead, it arrived quietly, almost imperceptibly, as a shift in perspective, a realignment of what mattered and what didn't. Walking away from that courtroom, I felt the weight of the past months pressing lightly against me, but it was no longer suffocating. Each step forward carried a sense of clarity I hadn't known before. The betrayal had been brutal, yes, but it had also exposed the depths of my resilience. Pain, I realized, is not only a burden, it is a teacher, a silent guide that shapes strength, discernment, and endurance. In the days that followed, I processed the nuances of that day again and again. Emily's smile, once a symbol of triumph and cruelty, became a point of reflection. I didn't hate her anymore, not entirely. Anger, I learned, is best used as a compass rather than a weapon. The real battle had never been with her, it had been within me. To navigate the maze of deception, humiliation, and societal judgment required confronting my own vulnerabilities, my own fears, and my own assumptions about love, loyalty, and justice. Friends and family offered their sympathies, their advice, and sometimes their judgments. But what I discovered in the silence was far more powerful than external validation. The resilience I had cultivated in secret, the courage I had quietly mustered, was my true triumph. I didn't need applause. I didn't need recognition. What mattered was that I had reclaimed my narrative, reclaimed my dignity, and emerged from the ordeal with a sense of self intact. Yet the story did not end in triumph alone. There were lessons etched into every heartbeat, every quiet moment of reflection. Betrayal is a stark reminder of human fragility, of the precariousness of trust, and of the quiet cruelty that can exist behind familiar faces. But it is also a testament to the strength of endurance, the capacity to rebuild, and the profound power of truth. Injustice, even when veiled by charm, timing, or perceived advantage, carries a trail that can be followed, exposed, and corrected. The challenge is the patience and courage to trace it. I often think about the courtroom, the air thick with judgment, tension, and whispered speculation. It was more than a stage for legal proceedings. It was a mirror reflecting the complexities of human behavior. It reminded me that appearances are often deceiving, that victories are rarely absolute, and that even when someone appears to have won, the underlying truth has a way of asserting itself. There is a paradox in experiences like these. The pain feels unbearable in the moment, yet it often catalyzes a depth of understanding that would have remained dormant otherwise. Betrayal taught me discernment. Deception taught me vigilance. Loss taught me gratitude for authenticity. And above all, the entire ordeal reinforced a fundamental truth: Resilience is not measured by the absence of adversity, but by the willingness to confront it, endure it, and emerge whole on the other side. Even now, I cannot erase the memory of her smile, nor would I want to. It serves as a reminder that life is rarely fair, that timing can be cruel, and that people will act in ways we cannot predict. But it also serves as a reminder that power is not in the hands of the deceiver, it is in the hands of those who choose to stand firm, who choose truth over fear, and who choose integrity over bitterness. As I reflect on the entirety of this journey, a single thought resonates: betrayal, heartbreak, and injustice may scar the soul, but they cannot define it. We are not solely the sum of the cruelties inflicted upon us, nor the failures of those we trusted. We are the strength we summon, the truths we uncover, and the compassion we carry forward even when the world has tested our limits. And so, as I step into the next chapter of my life, the memories of that courtroom, of the smirk that once cut so deeply, are not chains but markers. They are markers of resilience, courage, and the quiet victory of the human spirit over adversity. In the end, I am left with a question I hope lingers with anyone who hears this story. When life blindsides you with betrayal and injustice, will you let it define you, or will you rise above it, unbroken, and reclaim the narrative of your own life?